see as being weak or in trouble, those are the only times that you would draw your kippah. So, and a good example of how the people have sort of changed their minds on some of these things, Gur Hargobind actually built a mosque for the people even after his father had been killed by Muslims. So he did not hold a grudge against Muslims per se, but he held a grudge against oppressors. So that's the mentality of it. You need to go out and seek injustice and take care of that. You're not going out and taking things and being aggressive and being the conqueror, that sort of thing. So I compare it a lot to being like a police officer. They have a uniform and they're going to go out and take care of people. Now, are there bad police officers sometimes? Yes. But that's sort of the mentality of it. They're not out to do harm. They have a uniform that they wear. They have their articles of faith that they wear. And their goal is to do seva and to also take care of people. And that's what they do.
A fabulous presentation, Laurie. You're just such an extraordinary scholar and extraordinary scholar activist, scholar, really a model of that. And I just feel very honored to be able to work with you. What you raise about martyrdom in your comparison of King and the Sikh leader whose name I can't pronounce is very provocative, because it's making you think in ways that maybe I haven't thought before. I think a lot depends on how you define martyrdom. But my sense is that martyrdom was not a part of King's philosophy of social change, the way it may have been part of really embedded in the philosophy or worldview of the Sikh people. But certainly notions of self-sacrifice, which, as you said before, could be considered martyrdom. But King rarely ever used the term martyrdom. I think possibly in the eulogy for the 4 girls who were killed in Birmingham, he may have. But I just don't. It's not a term that he would use. So it's not part of the philosophy and the practice of nonviolent direct action per se in an overt way, but in a less overt way. It is very much so not using the term martyrdom, and that's where I'm trying to figure out what difference there might be. But King was very open, sometimes publicly, sometimes not so publicly, in making it very clear that he would be willing to risk his life, and that a person who hasn't found something they're willing to die for has not yet lived, or maybe even doesn't even have the right to live. So that is very much part of it, but it's more covert. And in his public, of course, he spoke to different audiences, but in his public talk and writing, he really wouldn't talk so much about sacrificing his life. He'd talk about self-sacrifice, for sure, and going to jail and so forth. But nevertheless, in a way that was maybe even more sort of proactive martyrdom, or promoting martyrdom without calling it martyrdom, as early as 1957, I met one of the Little Rock Nine, who desegregated the Central High School in Little Rock, and she said that King met with them, and here they were, teenagers and younger, and he said to them, "You need to be willing to sacrifice your life for this cause." And so he would make it very clear, at least privately, and sometimes very publicly, that you needed to be willing to sacrifice your life. Yet somehow it doesn't have the same sense of martyrdom and he knew that he was going to die and so on, that he was going to be killed, but it, there's a difference that I need to maybe talk to you more about to understand what, because I don't really, or haven't yet, maybe until today, maybe I'll change, I haven't yet really seen King as associated with martyrdom per se, even though perhaps in other words or other ways of expressing it, in fact, he was, but often sort of when the cameras were away and when he was talking to people in a personal way.
Yeah, I think that as far as King goes, maybe he would not want to have that out in the open, like you say. Maybe this is something he would talk about more privately, that sort of thing. If you remember the list, that the sort of the 10 Commandments that he asked of his followers, and at the very bottom he asked them to listen next to kin. That really struck me.
Yeah.
So maybe he's not necessarily saying it, like you said, not overtly, but maybe covertly, maybe suggesting the idea that something could happen, but maybe not wanting to go that far.
He didn't want to scare people off.
Exactly.
He didn't want to scare
exactly.
Maybe we have time for one more thought before I try to close this out.
Okay, I was just going to say, since the two of you were talking about this martyrdom and thing, I was just remembering that for the Freedom Rides, they actually had to write like final letters before they left on the Freedom Rides. They actually had to write letters as if they weren't coming back.
But King refused to go with them.
That's why they call him the Lord. But yeah, so that just was interesting to me that there was that definite conversation.
But it's a good point though, because so much of the civil rights work and human rights work does require a lot of sacrifice from people. And you look at the history of people who have tried to move us forward. They were hated, absolutely hated.
Still hated.
Yes.
Can we thank Lori again? So I want to thank you again for coming to support the work of the MLK Scholars. And I think tonight, as I just sort of try to figure out how to sum it up, we have, we've heard of Doctors Beyond Borders, Without Borders. So we have King Scholars Beyond Borders. And I think, that's one of the competencies, right, or something, we have a question, to begin to think beyond that with which we're familiar, geographically, culturally, and beyond. And so I'm just tickled pleased that the King Scholars are leading us in that way. So thanks, Laurie. We hope that you'll come back for the next presentations next time. Thank you.